Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz, Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPR is an autonomous policy research center. It's housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. And this program is part of that effort. We're going to discuss the ongoing savagery in Palestine. And I have a great guest to discuss that. I'm not going to reveal his name immediately, but let's begin with what the situation is. Scattered over the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea lie the remnants of failed peace plans, international summits, secret negotiations, UN resolutions, and state building programs, most of them designed to partition this long contested territory into two independent states, Israel and Palestine. The collapse of these initiatives has been as predictable as the confidence with which US presidents have launched new ones. It was, is, and will remain irrational for Israel to absorb the costs of an agreement when the price of the alternative is so comparatively low. The consequences of choosing impasse are hardly threatening. Mutual recriminations over the cause of stalemate, new rounds of talks, and retaining control of all the West Bank from within and much of Gaza from without. Well, actually, they're now inside Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel continues to receive more US military aid per year than goes to all the world's other nations combined and presides over a growing economy, rising standards of living, and a population that reports one of the world's highest levels of subjective well-being. Not exactly correct at this point, but let's proceed with this. Israel will go on absorbing the annoying but so far tolerable costs of complaints about settlement policies, and it will likely witness several more countries bestowing the state of Palestine with symbolic recognition. A few more negative votes in impotent university student councils, limited calls for boycotts of settlement goods, and occasional bursts of violence that the greatly overpowered Palestinians are too weak to sustain. There is no contest. Well, this is an excerpt from Nathan Thrall's 2017 book, The Only Language They Understand, Forcing Compromise in Israel and Palestine. Thrall, incidentally, is a Jewish-American writer based in Jerusalem, and his latest work, which is much celebrated, is A Day in the Life of Abd Salama, which I started reading a few days ago, and I'm quite enjoying it. It's not exactly an easy read, but nonetheless, captures the complexity of the situation. So until Israel can avert real pain and is supported by the world powers led by the United States, there can be no peace. At this moment, we don't even know what any peace would look like. The chimera, or if you will, the red herring of a two-state solution or a binational state, a political and reconciliation process that ended the apartheid in South Africa. We do know from evidence that Israel has never wanted to have a sovereign Palestinian state. Not in 1948, and certainly not now. The current evidence is how Benjamin Netanyahu's government has been reacting to the possibility of France, for instance, the latest case, recognizing Palestine as a state. When Ariel Sharon decided to pull back from Gaza, the Director General of his office, though West class, interpreted the disengagement as a means to prevent a political solution. This is Emi Aylon mentioning this in his book, Friendly Fire. So what did West class say? He said that abandoning Gaza supplies the amount of formaldehyde that's necessary so that there will not be a political process with the Palestinians. When you freeze that process, you prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and you prevent a discussion on the refugees, the borders, and Jerusalem. Effectively, the sole package called the Palestinian state, with all it entails, has been removed indefinitely from our agenda until the Palestinians turn into Finns. So where are things headed? To Palestinian expulsion, extermination? To discuss the genocide unfolding before the world real time, I have with me Daniel Levy. Levy is a renowned British-Israeli analyst, president of the US Middle East Project, and a former Israeli peace negotiator under Israeli Prime Ministers Itzhak Rabin and Ehud Barak. Levy has described the peace process, the refuge of scoundrels who want to maintain the status quo. He also recently appeared before the UN Security Council, and in his testimony dubbed Israel an occupying, colonizing state that is rendering the UN Charter meaningless. Daniel, it's great to have you back. The last time you were on this program was when this savagery had just begun. You wrote an op-ed for Zetio titled, "I negotiated for Israeli Prime Ministers. Netanyahu is lying." But at the same time, you also mentioned that these peace processes, as you mentioned, are the refuge of scoundrels. So they're not going to go anywhere. I mean, I mentioned Thrall's, the excerpt from Thrall's book. So where exactly are we headed? I mean, this term that West Class used, formaldehyde, I found it diabolically apt, because this is a preservative used for embalming corpses, right? So it's a very grotesque, analogy, but I think it's also, as I said, diabolically apt. What do you make of where things are going?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's really good to be back with you, Ejaz, and I'm glad we could do this, and I'm not at all glad the circumstances, as you mentioned, we last spoke, when the dimensions of the Israeli reaction were becoming clear, and now 550 plus days later, we are in the midst of, I do not think it is inaccurate to call this a genocidal assault on Gaza. On day one, Israel declared its intention to conduct war crimes, actually, to collectively punish and cut off all food, fuel, water, and electricity to the population in Gaza. This isn't a natural disaster that has fallen upon the 2 million plus Palestinian residents of Gaza. This is a premeditated campaign, and it is one which, by and large, the world, and in particular Israel's Western allies, led by the US, have not only been bystanders to, but active enablers of. And if people are paying attention, then they will see that Israel is now in its most aggressive assault on the occupied West Bank since 1967, when Israel took those territories, and has been in belligerent illegal occupation of those Palestinian territories ever since. We now have Israeli forces destroying the infrastructure across a number of West Bank towns, across refugee camps, now moving towards the town of Nablus and the refugee camp of Balata, over 40,000 displaced there. So what is going on, as you ask? And it was interesting and useful for me that you took us back to that quote from the advisor to Sharon, Mr. Dov Weissglass, that quote of formaldehyde. Because I think what we're witnessing now is moving on from that moment. Ejaz, what we are probably seeing in the current actions of Israel is the attempt to move from the management of apartheid towards an attempt to make irreversible and permanent the mass removal of Palestinians, either forced displacement from Gaza and in the future from the West Bank, and or the physical removal via killing, making the conditions there unlivable, because there is a camp in Israel today for whom apartheid and the incremental taking of land and management of this is not enough. And they see an opportunity to go further. That's what we're witnessing today. And I think the question is, how far will they be able to go? What can stop them? Is there going to be belatedly pressure from the outside? And I'm not confident that there will be. If not, then you have this basic equation of, can Palestinian resilience, because for everything we've seen in Gaza, we see that Palestinians cling to their life and their land. So we see Palestinian resilience. We see the fact that the armed resistance is not being easily defeated by Israel. In fact, Israel has not achieved this victory over Hamas. And opposite that, we see the dynamics inside Israel. And that dynamic also matters. And it's not a dynamic centered around concern for Palestinians. I don't want to mislead our viewers. There is a cohort of Israeli Jews for whom that is a motivating factor. They see in Jewish history, in Jewish ethics, in Jewish religion, in their own humanity, a compelling case to oppose this because it is wrong. That exists, but a much larger group of Israelis, and this is where there's real polarization in society, are opposing this not because of what it does to Palestinians, but because they question, how does this help bring back the Israelis who are held? How does this bring back the hostages? How is this in Israel's security interest? And they now attribute this to a narrow, personal, political coalition interest of Netanyahu and his extreme coalition allies. So there's almost this race, how much damage they can do before things inside Israel begin to unravel. And that's the challenge we're faced with. And so, yes, there is the bigger question of how one reverses years of Palestinians living under apartheid, living in this regime of structural violence. But there's the very immediate challenge of stopping the starvation, the forced displacement, and what is an attempted genocide.
So I'm happy you talked about this internal division within the Israeli society. We remember that, previously also the Israeli establishment and some way or the other, or some of those field commanders who were more gung-ho would try to do things, but there would also be a certain backlash. For instance, when that incident at Qana happened in Lebanon, there was, and it became one of the big factors in getting the Israelis to withdraw. Similarly, there was the movement, I forget the name, the mothers of four or whatever it was called. That movement was going around. In fact, the wife of the Israeli northern commander was part of the movement, even as he was supporting a more aggressive, incursions into Lebanon. It seems to me that for some reason, that kind of internal dissent, plus 972, we were just the other day talking about this, the reservists signing a letter saying that we don't want this war to go on and the rest of it. So there's still those voices that have, for various reasons, and I'm assuming also for reasons of the moral code of Judaism, who believe that what is happening is something which is savagery, which is a travesty, and it should stop. But it's not really getting a groundswell. Is this something which worries you? I know that there are a number of other Israelis or the Jewish scholars who do believe and who have said this openly, that this greatly worries them. Just to add to it, Daniel, to make the point that you do realize that given this new definition, you are also, you as a Jew are an anti-Semitic Jew. That's where the situation has reached.
Yeah, so it's a lot to unpack, Ejaz, and I think you've set it out very well for us. So let's pull on a few of those threads. First of all, the thing you referred to at the end there, as Israel knew where it was heading, it knew that even this Potemkin peace process, even this make-believe that, no, we want to do, even that has been pushed aside. This is an Israel that openly and proudly owns the fact that it is here to end this with the Palestinians on deeply inequitable zero-sum terms. It knew where it was going with the trampling of Palestinian rights, and therefore, to quote that phrase, it decided that the best form of defense was attack. It wanted to shift the ground. Here I'm talking about narratives, about the global debate, about what would its allies at least be focusing on. And it wanted to shift the ground away from the accusations, this occupation has become permanent, it's illegal, this looks like apartheid, these look like war crimes, you're violating international law, to say, let's not talk about that, but let's talk about why you pick on Israel. And you pick on Israel because this is the only Jewish state in the world. Of course, it's nonsense. As Palestinian friends of mine say, we really don't care who our oppressors are. Your identity as being a Jewish state is neither here nor there. It's what you're doing to us that is the problem. So anyway, Israel came up with a definition of anti-Semitism that would shift the focus onto conflating, onto collapsing together two things which are not the same. One is that hatred of Jews, that threat to Jews, which is anti-Semitism. And the other is that opposition, that criticism, that taking action against the illegal policies of a particular state. Israel has been very successful, especially in the US, also in large parts of Europe. There's a historic guilt there. There's the influence of the Israel lobby. There's the influence often of Christian evangelical Zionists who believe that all the Jews have to gather there, and then not such great things happen to the Jews, but let's gloss over that. So they came up with this called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. That has been deployed very effectively to try to silence debate, to make it forbidden, to criticize Israel in certain ways, to question Zionism as if, this is the state ideology which is pursuing apartheid. These Israeli political parties, political actors self-describe their motivations as falling within a Zionist framing. So the idea that you can challenge Zionism is now seen as anti-Semitism. What I would say about that is it's been very successful. I think it is deeply mistaken, and there is such a thing as anti-Semitism. That needs to be fought alongside other forms of racism. Unfortunately, the way it's being done is it creates divisions. In a place like where I am, the UK, this has really led to deep fractures between the Jewish community, Muslim community, other communities fighting discrimination. It has pitted them against each other quite intentionally. But the increasing transparency with which Israel deploys this, this is done with ever less credibility, I think is leading to a pushback amongst Jews. And this is also quite dangerous. If other people looking at this and saying, well, if that's anti-Semitism, then this anti-Semitism thing can't be very serious, because this isn't about hatred to Jews. This is about the actions of a country, like any other country, should be held to international law. So that's one of the things going on. The other thing that we were talking about was what's going on inside Israeli society. And you brought us back to those moments when there has been, I think, a greater voice of moral conscience amongst part, at least, of the Israeli public. And as I've said, today it exists, but it feels much less palpable. The center of gravity in Israel seems to have moved much deeper into a willingness, even an enthusiasm about demonizing, dehumanizing Palestinians, ignoring, blocking out the horrendous actions that Israel is undertaking. I think that's true. I partly locate that in the degree of impunity, the extent to which Israel can get away with this. Yeah. So Israelis have been told, whatever you think of Palestinians, there's a limit to what we can do because the world won't let us. And here they see it. And there have been various moments where that was tested and Israel saw it could get away with it, and it doubled down on doing bad things. And the lesson to the Israeli public is, well, maybe we're not doing something so bad after all, because people seem to accept this. When those Arab states, led by the United Arab Emirates, cut those normalization Abraham Accord deals with Israel, that was probably the most important breakthrough moment in telling Israelis, it's okay, you're not doing anything bad, you have impunity. And yet, and here's where I want to switch. I'll make one last comment before I'm sure you're going to come back to me on this. And yet, there is a fault line inside Israeli society, because about half the Israeli Jewish population, they can stomach, unfortunately, many of them, what's being done to Palestinians, but they are questioning whether this works for Israel, whether the extremism of some of these government characters, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, whether there is overreach here. Can Israel really, is it really in Israel's interest to try and forcibly expel Palestinians, to pay for that, to have to do days and months of reserve duty in the military? Much as people have this image of a vast Israeli military machine that is unvanquishable, sure, it has a technological advantage guaranteed by the US, but it doesn't have numbers. And so to hold territory, Israel relies on reservists. It relies on people going out of their daily lives and coming and doing their reserve duty. And more Israelis are, first of all, experiencing, how do I hold my family life together when most of my time I'm doing military duty? How do I hold my business, my work life, my mental health together? And then for some, they also question, is this what's going to get the hostages out? Is this going to make our economy stronger? Can we really set ourselves against not just the Palestinians, but even if certain Arab leaderships don't care about this, the people, they see those images in the Middle East, North Africa, West Asia region, and well beyond, including, I'm sure, in your country, Ejaz. And this is just storing up more anger. And can a small country like Israel, and will America really rush in and save us? Did anyone actually send troops to Ukraine? So I think more and more Israelis are asking, can this succeed? And in that moment, I think the question for the rest of us is, how does one double down on those vulnerabilities, make the Israeli economy, make that choice for Israelis, Israel's participation in international sport? And so here I think that we can't just wait for America, because in America, the politics is always very distorted. The policy is distorted. Today, the Biden administration enabled this. Today, you have a president who, as a real estate magnate and coming from a country with a settler colonial mentality, they look at Palestinians and they say, hey, we'll give you a different property, just like I would in a Manhattan building where I'm trying to get rid of the residents. They don't understand the idea of attachment to the land, people who have that connection. So I think the question for the rest of us is, how do we keep pushing to make this not so cost-free for Israel?
Yeah, well, this is a question that's been vexing me for the last more than a year and a half. You're right, reference Trump. The whole idea of gentrification project, real estate project, probably not realizing why there is so much pushback against these gentrification projects, whether it's in in London, New York, elsewhere, Los Angeles, the rest of it. But I think impunity is the key to this, because if we go back to the Suez crisis, after America's pushback and ultimatum and the UNSC resolutions, Britain and France pulled back. Israel was not heeding that until Eisenhower called Ben-Gurion and said, well, Prime Minister, you need to get out of the... And he said, but, Knesset is not going to accept this. And he said, but Knesset is your problem, not mine. And he had to pull back. That happened when Reagan called Menachem Begin and said, you look at this picture, this looks like Holocaust. And Begin had to pull back, and later he lamented to one of the US publications, saying that, President Reagan was rather harsh when he spoke with me. That kind of thing has not happened under Biden. It is certainly not going to happen under Trump. And I think if that support is pulled back, whether in financial terms, whether in terms of military equipment, I don't think that Israel could have sustained this war, either on the northern front or against Gaza. But how do we get to critical mass, Daniel? That is the real question, and that critical mass has to uh, come, within Israel also and outside Israel also. Do you think that symbolic recognition of Palestinian state, which is neither here nor there, is going to achieve that?
I agree with the conclusion you reached in your rhetorical question, Ejaz. Exactly. And so there's a couple of directions to come at this from. First of all, the emperor has no clothes. This is so transparent now.
Absolutely.
Israel openly tells us what it's doing. On the 30th of March, the defense minister, Katz, appoints someone called Colonel Blitzstein to head up a voluntary emigration directorate. There's nothing voluntary when you are starving people, where you've destroyed their entire housing stock, their schools and hospitals. There's nothing voluntary about then telling them, here are the third countries which we've designated for you to go to. Now, I don't think Israel can successfully pull that off. But the point here is that the West, which tells us we stand up for these international laws, this international system, and then it defends, because it's its own ally, it defends these egregious genocidal violations. The International Court of Justice has ruled on this. The International Criminal Court has put out arrest warrants. So it's there now in front of our eyes for us all to see. And
as clear as daylight.
As clear as daylight. However, in the midst of this, and this makes it much more difficult, Ejaz, we also have we have a Palestinian Authority leadership, which unfortunately has become embedded in this make-believe system, is attached to the West, is funded by the West, exists at the goodwill of Israel, still engages in security cooperation against its own people. And they go round, and their thing is, we need money, we need recognition, symbolic recognition of this. They're not saying you need to recognize the state of Palestine, then recognize it's occupied, and then sanction the country that's occupying it. That could be meaningful. Yeah. So we have a real problem, because increasingly the body that is considered to represent the Palestinians more closely approximates the Bantu stands established by South African apartheid in order to keep the black population of South Africa in check, manageable, controllable. That is something the Palestinians need to resolve. Of course, a system has been put in place, which makes it very difficult for them to do so. It also has a spillover effect, as do these webs of relations with the West, on everyone. Most importantly, in our case, the frontline states, those Arab states who give the rhetorical support, but where are they when the chips are down?
Absolutely.
That is not popular with their own people. And so we face now, and this is what's complex, because lots of things about this issue are not complex. There is an illegal, belligerent, occupying power using structural violence, running an apartheid regime, which is now turned genocidal. That's not complicated. Putting a stop to that, Palestinians determining what their future should be, none of that is complex. What's complex is, how does one unpick the network which keeps this in place, which is part of, to go back to your own reference, that formaldehyde. And in that respect, one has to remove the obstacles to the Palestinians being able to refresh and renew their own politics. And partly, I'm not saying this is a silver bullet. There isn't one. This will take time. We have to put an end to the immediate horrors but the bigger picture will take time. But partly, one needs to take a look, a snapshot of what is the world we are living in today. This is a world which is rapidly shifting geopolitically. It is not a unipolar world where the US calls all the shots. In fact, if the US is now self-harming, weakening itself, which I believe it is doing, as it even turns its allies against it, the consequences of that could be very significant for the country that is most dependent on the US, bar none, which is Israel. And so one has to look at what is the role of mid-level powers? What is the role of these emerged powers? What is the role of regional groupings? What is the role of a China in this situation? How does one pull those Arab states into a place where they might more directly challenge this? What is the role of civil society boycotts? What is the role of states when they can go to the ICJ? They can go to international fora. They can say that at least we will have no part in trading with this abnormal apartheid genocidal society. You know, you actually have now, although Israel dismisses what's going on at the ICC and dismisses what's going on at the ICJ, it's conscious that it no longer wants to give the identity of some of its senior military personnel. It's telling its soldiers, don't post things, because this can land people in trouble. So there are tools at our disposal. Palestinians are going to have to lead this. Palestinians are going to have to get their own political house in order. But the rest of us all do have a role to play. And I think this fluid environment is going and is on a path which can change that dynamic, but it won't happen on its own. And in the meantime, we are stuck watching these appalling images, feeling helpless. But the message I would send is, don't exaggerate that helplessness. Don't exaggerate that hopelessness. And whether it's the dynamics inside Israeli society, whether it's the resilience of the Palestinians, or whether it's the changing nature of the world in which this is taking place, there are multiple openings, which I think, whether it's the Palestine situation or other situations, can lead us to a much better place.
Well, Daniel, your answer has put so much on the table that we probably need an entire program to discuss that. I'm not sure. I mean, you know, the great changes are happening geopolitically, that's for sure. Trump himself is disrupting a lot. Whether this turns into some kind of Yalta 2.0 moment with spheres of influence, we don't know. There are definitely great minuses for Israel in the way the situation is unfolded. But I think the one thing that sustains Israel is the United States. And the United States, it does not appear to be, you know, pulling back from that support. How much the Arab states are likely to you know, use whatever clout they have, if not militarily, at least diplomatically, by, you know, let's say by saying, well, you know, Abraham Accords are dead. You know, how much of that is going to impact Israel, of course, is anybody's guess. But before I let you go, I'm assuming you were part of Taba too. And I was going through the you know, the non-paper that was written by the Spanish UN envoy
Miguel Moratinos.
Yes, Moratinos. So I was reading Moratinos' non-paper, and it seemed that a lot had been achieved, even though there was a lot that needed to be worked on. But then, do you think it kind of fizzled out because of the political situation in Israel with Ehud Barak going into elections and then, of course, losing the election?
Look, I think it did. I was part of those negotiations. Could Israel, and I think we know the answer to this question, but could Israel actually get to a place where it accepted Palestinian anything, self-determination, sovereignty, a hard border. At the time, perhaps, you never know, that path not taken. There was an Israeli leader who was assassinated by an Israeli Jewish extremist, Itzhak Rabin. You can't do the counterfactual. You never can.
Yeah.
That's quarter of a century ago. And I think a lot of blood has flown under the bridge since then. Israel has deeply entrenched its presence. And so a quarter of a century later, I think we have to open this whole thing up. And the fundamental question is, will Israelis have to face a choice because the incentive structure changes? Because this is costly rather than cost-free to treat the Palestinians this way. What do Palestinians want? Partition has encouraged this displacement and apartheid. Do Palestinians have to be able to come together and determine their own political aspiration? I think if Palestinians push for something like the ANC, equality within the one state which Israel has created, not the removal of Israeli Jews. This isn't an Algeria outcome, but a situation in which a regime of ethno-nationalist supremacy is removed. If that is a Palestinian position, then I think it will take time. It will be difficult, but I don't think it will be any more or less difficult than striving for two states. If Palestinians still argue for two states, but also justice for refugees and equality for the Palestinian citizens inside Israel, one would have to respect that. But I think we are at a fundamentally different point. And I think in that moment, imperative number one is put an end to the horrors. But imperative number two is Palestinians defining the way forward. And whether it's deoccupation a la two states, whether it's acknowledging that there is a one state reality and it needs to be equality, whatever that outcome is, we need to respect that and go there. And I tend to think it's not going to revolve around dusting off papers from a quarter century ago, but we will see. And it's a pleasure talking to you, Ejaz.
Absolutely, Daniel. In my closing, I would just say that this whole situation, as Theodore Herzl had painted in his novel Old New Land, which has just one Arab Palestinian, Rashid Bey, who seems to really be thankful to the Jews for having just changed the hue of the land. But the reality is much closer. As far as Zeev Jabotinsky, who I think is the pater familias of the Likudniks, and I actually pulled up this quote from his Iron Wall, and he says, Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot reach. The wall is a metaphor for dominance and protection, measures physical, legal, economic, and military to keep Arabs subjugated. But here, I believe Jabotinsky seemed to ignore his own rather incisive assessment, and where he said colonization can have only one aim, and Palestine Arabs cannot accept the same. It lies in the very nature of things, and in this particular regard, nature cannot be changed. It seems to me that this is a war with many battles. It's unfortunate, but that's also the reality. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, do subscribe to the channel. It doesn't get me any lucre, but it helps us, get you better episodes and better discussions, better guests. Until next time, take care and goodbye.